Louise Victoria. Alexandra Dagmar was born on February 20th, 1867, at Marlborough House, the London home of her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, later King Edward VIII and Queen Alexandra. She spent much of her childhood at Sandringham House, the family's country home in Norfolk, and she would join her family on occasional summer holidays in Denmark, her mother's homeland. Louise, together with her younger sisters Victoria and Maud, was educated under the supervision of tutors. Described as a very withdrawn girl, Louise and her sisters lived very isolated lives, smothered by their mother, who did not wish to see her children away from her side. Despite attempts on the part of the Princess of Wales to keep Louise unmarried, she nevertheless married Alexander Duff, 6th Earl Fife, on Saturday, July 27, 1889, at the private chapel in Buckingham Palace. The Archbishop of Canterbury officiated the service. The groom was 18 years her senior. The couple had 3 children: Alistair Duff, Marquis of Macduff, who was a stillborn, Princess Alexandra, 2nd Duchess of Fife, and Princess Maud. The couple resided at Mar Lodge, a sporting lodge built for them by Alexander Marshall Mackenzie. 2 days after the wedding, Queen Victoria elevated Earl of Fife's title and created him Duke of Fife and Marquis of Macduff in the peerage of the United Kingdom. The letters patent creating this dukedom provided that the titles would pass to a male heir lawfully begotten. However, on April 24, 1900, by now it was impossible for the princess to bear a son and heir to her husband's title. Queen Victoria signed letters patent creating a second dukedom of Fife, along with the earldom of Macduff in the peerage of the United Kingdom. A special remainder allowed the daughters of the first duke, and then to their male descendants, to inherit his titles in the absence of a male heir. On November 9, 1905, Edward VIII created Louise the Princess Royal, the highest honour bestowed on a female member of the royal family. At the same time, the king declared that the 2 daughters of the Princess Royal would be styled as princesses, with the style and attribute of highness, and with precedence immediately after all members of the royal family bearing the style of Royal Highness. In December 1911, the Princess Royal and her family survived a shipwreck while sailing aboard SS Delhi to Egypt. Although they survived unharmed, the Duke of Fife contracted pleurisy and died at Aswan, Egypt, in January 1912. After her husband's death, Princess Louise withdrew from whatever limited participation she had both in royal life and in society, although she would sometimes accompany her mother and sister Victoria to public events. She eventually suffered from heart disease. In October 1929, she suffered from gastric hemorrhage while at Mar Lodge and had to be rushed back to London. She died in her sleep in January 1931, a month before her 64th birthday, at her home in Portman Square, London, with her 2 daughters at her bedside. She was buried in St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Her remains were later removed to the private chapel, Mar Lodge, Braemar, Aberdeenshire. Her Royal Highness Princess Victoria, Alexandra Olga Mary of Wales, was born on the 6th of July 1868 at Marlborough House, a short distance from Buckingham Palace in London. Victoria was given the name Toria among her relatives to distinguish her from her aunt, Crown Princess Victoria of Prussia. She had 3 elder siblings and 2 younger ones. Albert Victor, George and Louise arrived in 1864, 1865 and 1867 respectively. Christened at Marlborough House with 9 royal godparents, including Tsar Alexander II of Russia and Caroline Amalie, the Dowager Queen of Denmark. Toria was part of a rowdy, playful family that preferred leaping on the fine furniture to quiet pursuits and lessons, which frequently met the disapproval of Queen Victoria, their grandmother. Alex, always a possessive mother, insisted that her children called her Mother Dear. George, the future King George V, was Toria's favourite. Brother and sister remained devoted to one another all their lives. At Marlborough House and Sandringham in Norfolk, the sisters were educated together by tutors. Summers were often spent in Denmark with her numerous relations. Toria was described as mischievous, smart, tall and elegant. She had a wonderful sense of humour and was a good friend to everyone. Throughout her life, she enjoyed having pets, even keeping a tamed pigeon, carrying it around in a basket and taking it for walks. She liked cycling, horse riding, dancing and music, but her favourite pastime was photography. She collected several exceptional photo albums that have been used in exhibitions. She rejected a marriage proposal from her first cousin Crown Prince Christian of Denmark, and although Carlos of Portugal repeatedly asked for her to marry him, she, in agreement with her parents, declined on religious grounds. She had no wish to convert from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism, which was a non-negotiable factor in the match. The future Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, his cousin Sandro, the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, and Nikki's younger brother, Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich Misha, all pursued Toria, but their advances came to nothing. Alex persuaded Toria to resist marriage. Louise and Maud succeeded in marrying, and she was loath to let her remaining daughter leave her side. Bertie was hardly ever with her, and she'd endured decades of his infidelities. Alex needed a devoted companion. That role apparently fell to Toria. The former Prime Minister and widower, Archibald Primrose, 5th Earl of Rosebery, proposed to her. Although she was the one who unwillingly uttered the word no, it was her parents, particularly her mother, who decided her fate. Bertie saw no place for politicians in the royal family, so he vetoed a marriage, but Alex discouraged the match, as she had with the previous suitors, for more selfish reasons. Rosebery did not marry again. Toria never married. Her cousin, Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna of Russia, claimed that Toria was a glorified maid to Mother Dear. Toria acted as her mother's companion until the 20th of November 1925, Alex's death. Whilst she loved her mother deeply, there were numerous times when she put her mother's needs far above her own, and this built resentment, and her health declined. There were countless frustrating instances in which Alex called for her daughter's assistance only to have seemingly forgotten why she wanted her by the time she reached her. It seems highly unlikely that Alex, who presumably felt a sense of entitlement about keeping Toria for herself, appreciated the demands she placed on her daughter. Toria was expected to be content as her mother's companion. Toria increasingly tended towards hypochondria and was said to be bitter about her lot in life. Occasionally, her harsh words wounded others. She was labelled a bitch of the First Order by her nephew David, the petulant King Edward VIII. It seems probable that her illnesses and difficult nature were manifestations of her frustration with her stifling existence. Toria's brother George became king when their father died in May 1910, and he did what he could to ease the strain on her. Toria had little in common with his wife, Queen Mary, so she did not confide in her. In late November 1925, Toria grieved for the loss of her mother, but she also entered a form of retirement. Leaving Alex's beloved Sandringham for her brother George to utilise, Toria chose to live at Coppins in the small village of Iver in Buckinghamshire, where she committed herself to the local community's needs. She invited guests to stay at Coppins, including Archibald Primrose, 5th Earl of Rosebery, whom she retained as a friend in the years after his proposal until his passing in 1929. She pursued photography, gardened and helped a friend design the splendid Cestall Gardens in Anglesey, Wales. Victoria became a patron of three talented musical sisters and never lost her love for music. Her health was a constant drain on her energy. She died on the 3rd of December 1935 and was quietly buried at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, 4 days later, and then moved to Frogmore Mausoleum at Windsor. Her favourite brother George was devastated. Already suffering from poor health, the grief proved too much for him. He survived Turaya by just 5 weeks, passing away on the 20th of January 1936. Maud Charlotte. Mary Victoria was born on 26th of November 1869 at Marlborough House, London, and was the third daughter and fifth child of Edward and Alexandra of Denmark. As the youngest, Maud was lucky to have a less austere upbringing than her siblings, and she was reportedly her father's favourite child. Maud was a tomboy, which earned her the nickname of Harry, and she loved sports and horse riding. Maud and her siblings used to spend their summer holidays in Denmark and often went on cruises around Norway and the Mediterranean. Maud was in her late 20s before she decided to find a husband, and she set her sights on marrying Francis of Teck, the younger brother of her sister-in-law, Mary. However, he ignored her advances. Instead, Maud married her first cousin, Karl of Denmark, the second son of Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark, and Louise of Sweden on 22nd July 1896. The newlyweds lived in Copenhagen. However, they were given Appleton House on the Sandringham estate as a wedding gift, and their only child, Alexandra, was born there on 2nd July 1903. The union between Sweden and Norway was dissolved in 1905, and the Norwegian government offered the throne of Norway to Karl, partly due to Maud's connections with the British royal family and the fact Karl was descended from ancient Norwegian kings. Norway had not had an independent monarch since 1387, and the fact Karl already had a son was also in his favour. Karl was flattered by the offer. However, he insisted the Norwegian government hold a referendum to show whether they wanted a monarchy or wanted to be a republic. The results showed overwhelmingly in favour of retaining a monarchy, and Karl was officially elected on 18th November 1905. Karl chose to adopt the Old Norse name of Hakon, which immediately endeared him to the Norwegians, and his family left Copenhagen on the Danish royal yacht, Dannebrog, on 23rd of November 1905. At Oscarsborg Fortress, they boarded the Norwegian naval ship, Heimdall, and arrived in Oslo 3 days later. 2 days later, Hakon took his constitutional oath before Parliament as Norway's first independent king in 518 years. The coronation took place in the Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim on 22nd June 1906, and it was also the last to take place as the Norwegians felt the rites were too archaic. Afterwards, Hakon and Maud took an extensive tour around Norway before settling into the royal palace, which took 2 years to refurbish. The Norwegians were excited to have Hakon as king, and they were even more gratified when the royal couple announced their son was being renamed Olaf. Although Hakon had considerable powers as king, he wisely left politics to the government and concentrated on promoting the interests of the country instead. Although Maud would never cut her ties with Britain, she enjoyed her new duties as queen consort and was careful to show her support for Norwegian customs and culture. During the first years of their reign, the king and queen engendered favour when they wore various Norwegian folk costumes, and they involved themselves in charitable causes. Maud instigated the Dronningens Hjelpekomité, the Queen's Relief Committee, during World War I, and supported the feminist Katti Anker Moller's Home for Unwed Mothers. Maud continued to live at Appleton House when she was visiting England, and she designed English gardens at Kongsseteren, the Royal Lodge overlooking Oslo, and at the summer residence at Bygdøy. Olav married his first cousin Mertha of Sweden on 21st March 1929, and they had 2 daughters, Ragnhild, and Astrid, and one son, Harold. As the first heir to the throne to be raised in Norway since the Middle Ages, he received extensive military training and was raised as a Norwegian. While visiting England in 1938, Maud became seriously ill with stomach pains and was taken to a clinic where she received emergency abdominal surgery. Maud survived the surgery, however she died of heart failure on 20th November with Håkon by her side. Maud's body was returned to Norway, where she was interred in the royal mausoleum at the Akershus Castle in Oslo. She was the last surviving child of Alexandra and Edward VII,